Welcome to Preeminent Test Prep. Today is day 22 in our 90-day SAT prep series. Today we're going to spend half an hour on the math section and then we'll switch over and do half an hour with the writing section. So for the math section today, we're going to be going through problems 16 through 20 of the Math No Calculator section from a 2018 released SAT test from the state of Maine. And then we'll go through problems 16 through 22 from the Math with Calculator section. So as I go through these, it's not going to be just me solving them, it's going to be me teaching you what to look for. So I'll be giving you insight, tips, tricks, and advice as far as strategies for the SAT math section and things that you can put in your notes to help you improve and become more efficient when taking the SAT math section. So be sure to have a notebook out and have that handy and at the ready, because I'll be telling you things to put in your notebooks to help you out. And then after that, we'll switch over to the SAT writing section where I will give you more insights into that as well. So let's go ahead and get started with question 16. Keep in mind this is the Math No Calculator section, so you won't be able to use use a calculator on questions 16 through 20. So question 16. So I see I have my equation above. In the equation above, what is the value of s when t equals -1? So I always want to pay attention to any when statements. So when statements or if statements. So you can put that in your notes. Anytime it tells me if a variable equals something or when a variable equals something, I always want to make sure I underline or circle that because that's almost always important to being able to solving the problem. The next thing I've circled or want to pay attention to is what I'm asked to answer with. So in this case, it's the value of s. I always want to circle or underline that because sometimes it'll be something like 2s plus 3, in which case I have to solve for s and then add 3 to that, or after I multiply by 2. So I'm always paying attention to what I'm asked to answer with. In this case, just the value of s when t equals -1. So in this case, I go ahead and plug in my -1 for t. So I'll have plus -1, which is just going to be -1. So then I'll add 1 to each side to get rid of it. So I add 1 to each side. Now I have 11 plus 1, that's going to give me 12. I have 12 equals 2s. Now I divide by each side by 2. To solve for s, I see s equals 12 over 2, which is 6. So my answer for 16 then is going to be answer choice 6. In this case, there are no answer choices, so we're just filling in a bubble. So we'd fill in the bubble for 6. So as far as tips to put in your notes there, making sure we're looking out for the value, so what we have to answer with, and then also making sure that we're circling these when or if statements. After that, it was just using algebra to solve. Question 17, what is one possible solution to the equation above? Whenever I see one possible solution, that's kind of indicating to me that there may be multiple, so I just have to make sure I answer with one of them. All right, so what's one possible solution to the equation above? Well, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take this x minus 1 squared, and I'm going to go ahead and do that. So that means I have an x minus 1 times an x minus 1. Okay, when I do that, I'm going to end with x squared minus 2x plus 1. So I have that equal to 3x minus 5. I want to get all my x's on one side, and I also want to get all my constants on one side. And I want to have this set equal to 0, because then I can factor it out in order to solve for my solution. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to minus 3x from each side, and I'm going to add 5 to each side. So add 5 and subtract 3x. All right, so what are we going to end with then? Well, we're going to have this x squared will drop down. Then we'll have negative 2x minus 3x. That's going to give me negative 5x. And then I'll have plus 6, because 5 plus 1 is 6. That equals 0. So now I just factor it, and then whatever my factors are going to equal, right, I set them equal to 0, and then that will give me my answer for a possible solution. So I see my factors in this case. I'm looking at what times what gives me positive 6. That adds to negative 5, and I know that that's going to be a negative 3 and a negative 2. Okay, because negative 3 times negative 2 gives me positive 6, and minus 2 plus minus 3 gives me minus 5. So in that case, then my answers could be x equals 3, because x minus 3 equals 0. We add 3 to each side, and we see that x would equal 3. And we also see then that x could equal 2. Okay, I'm getting that from right here. We flip the sign here, and that's what x can equal. Right here as well, flip the sign, that's what x can equal. So in this case, x could equal 2 or 3. We'll just go ahead and answer with 2, but it doesn't matter. You could also answer with 3. So either of those would be correct. All right, question 18. As far as notes for number 17 to put in your notebook, there's really not a ton. A lot of this is just understanding algebra. There's going to be more notes on other questions than others, right? Some of them can be solved much faster with a trick. In this case, though, it's really just making sure you understand algebra. So that's what that one is. All right, 18. In the complex number system, okay, so this is with imaginary numbers. What is the value of the expression 16i to the fourth minus 8i squared plus 4? Okay, the big thing here is understanding that I squared equals -1 and understanding that I to the fourth equals 1. Okay, if you understand that, you can solve this very, very quickly. So if I to the fourth equals 1, then we know that 16 times 1 is just going to be 16. And then we have minus 8 times I squared. We know I squared is -1, so that means we just flip the sign. And then we have to add 4 as well. And we see that we're going to get 16 plus 8 is going to give us 24 plus 4. Our answer will be 28. All right, so things you need to have in your notes. If you don't have that I to the fourth equals 1, put that in your notes. And if you don't have the I squared equals -1, put that in your notes. You need to know both of these for the SAT math section, and they're very, very important. Okay, so if you know those and you understand that, then that problem right there is pretty easy. All right, question 19. The table above shows two pairs of values for the linear function f. The function can be written in the form f of x equals ax plus b, where a and b are constants. What's the value of a plus b? Okay, once again, notice how I always circle or underline what I'm asked to answer with. In this case, it's the value of a plus b. Okay, so I need to solve for a and b and then add them. Okay, keep in mind a is going to be my slope, b is going to be my y-intercept here. Well, I see my slope is going to be my rise over run. We know rise over run is our slope. Okay, we see our run here is from 8 to 12, so that's a positive 4. And we see that we rise from 12 to 17, so that's a positive 5. So our slope then is going to be 5 over 4. So that tells me the value of a, right, because my slope here, ax, my slope is a, and that's 5/4. So a will be 5/4. Now I need to add whatever b is equal to. Well, in order to solve for b, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to backtrack. Okay, so if I go back to 4, then I have to go back 5. Okay, and if I go back 5, then I'll go from 12 to 7. Now I subtract another 5 from that, and I'm going to go back to 2, and I go back from 8 to 4, and then from 4 to 0. I see at 0, which is going to be where my y-intercept is, I am at 2. Okay, so 2 is going to be my y value for my y-intercept. So b then has to be 2. I know that 2 can be rewritten as 8 over 4. Okay, so I write 8 over 4. That way it's easier for me to add them. And I see my answer then is going to be 13 over 4. So you could write that as 13 over 4. You could also write that as 3.25. One thing I would put in your notes is that I recommend keeping this as fractions instead of converting to decimals, and here's why. By keeping it as a fraction, we don't have to convert this 5/4 to a decimal. Okay? If we were to put this as 2.0 instead of 8 over 4, then we have to convert this right here to a decimal. So the quickest thing to do is to leave it as a fraction because one of ours is already a fraction, so it doesn't make sense to convert it to a decimal. We just want to go ahead and put that 2 as a fraction of 8 over 4. That also makes it very, very easy to add, and since it doesn't matter if we use decimals or fractions on the SAT math section, it's going to be easier for us to just have used fractions there. So that's one thing to note in your notes, is that if it's easier to use fractions, don't worry about converting to a decimal because you could make a mistake there. So we want to use the least steps possible. All right, question 20. Segments OA and OB are radii of the semicircle above. Arc AB has a length of 3 pi. Okay, so this here is going to be 3 pi from A to B. And OA equals 5. Okay, so this is my radius is 5. So R equals 5. My radius is 5. What's the value of x? Okay, one thing I want to note is that this x here is in degrees. Okay, so our answer has to be the degrees. It can't be in radians. It has to be in degrees. All right, well, if I want to solve for my degrees here, I see my radius is 5, and I know my circumference, which I'm going to call c, is equal to 2 times my radius times pi, which is also equal to my diameter times pi. It can be written either way. But we have our radius, we don't have our diameter, so we know our circumference is going to equal 2 times our radius 5 times pi, which means our circumference is going to be 10 pi. So as far as for solving for the value of x, if we know that our arc length is 3 pi, then we know that that 3 pi arc length over our 10 pi circumference is going to give us our fraction of our total number of degrees, right? So in this case, we see that that would be 3/10. Okay, so if we have 3/10 of our circumference, then that means we have 3/10 of our total degrees in a circle, which we know is 360 degrees. Okay, we see that this 0 can be dropped off of each, and we see then that we're going to have 3 times 36, which is going to give us 108. Okay, so 108 degrees. We don't have to put our degrees symbol in when we fill in our bubble sheet, so our answer there is just going to be 108. Okay, so the big thing there, if you wanted to, this would even save you time. If you saw that this was going to be a 3/10 or that was going to be your ratio, you could just go ahead and multiply that by that 360 over 1, and you could drop your pi, drop this, drop this, drop this, and that's another way just to get rid of this step down here if you wanted to do that even faster. But not everyone can recognize that right away, which is why I took that extra step. But if you can recognize that right away, that's going to save you time, and in either way, you're going to get 108 as your answer. All right, so that takes us through our math no calculator section. As far as tips for number 20, really the big thing there was just understanding your arc lengths, right? So if you have an arc length and you put it over your circumference, put it over circumference, and you can put this in your notes because this could be a helpful equation. Understand that that is going to equal, and keep in mind that I'm doing arc length over circumference. That's going to equal your degrees for the angle of the arc length. Degrees for angle of arc length over degrees in a circle, which is always going to be 360. So you could write degrees in a circle, or you could just write 360 degrees, right? It's going to be 360 degrees. Okay, so you can put that in your notes if you would like. Now we can go ahead and move on to the math with calculator section. So we're going to do problems 16 through 22 here. All right, so we got triangles ABC and DEF. They're similar triangles. Similar triangles mean that they have the same angles. Okay, so they have corresponding angles. They're the same angles. For example, A here is going to be the same angle as D, and then E there is going to be the same angle as B. Okay, what that also means is that their sides, right, their sides are going to have the same ratio across all sides. So for example, we have this 20 here and we have a 5 here. So I see that 20 over 4 is equal to 5. So I know I have to divide whatever side length I have here by 4 to get my side length over here, since that ratio has to stay the same across all of them. So I'm asked for how much longer segment EF is than DE. So that's referring specifically to my triangle over here, my smaller triangle. So I need to solve for DE and EF. Well, I know that I have to divide each side by 4, right, to get what it is on this triangle over here. So when I do that, I'll have 29 over 4 for my hypotenuse, and I'll have 21 over 4 for EF. Okay, so I need how much longer EF is than DE. Well, we know that DE, right, this is just asking for the difference. Keep that in mind. When we're asking for how much longer one segment is than the other, we just need the difference. So that's going to be that 29 over 4 minus our 21 over 4. Since we have a common denominator, we just go ahead and subtract. 29 minus 21 gives me 8. 8 over 4 gives me 2. So my answer there is going to be B. As far as things to put in your notes there, understanding similar triangles, that means that all of our angles are going to be the same, right? Or not all of the angles are the same, but we're going to have the same angles corresponding to their points on the other similar triangles. So in this case, angle A is going to equal angle D, angle B here is going to equal angle E, angle F is going to equal angle C. So understanding that, then we also need to understand that the ratio of their sides is going to be the same as well. So for example, our hypotenuse from B to A is going to be the same as it's going to have the same ratio. For example, here I'll write it like this: B to A over D to E. That's going to have the same ratio as BC and EF. Okay. So understanding that they're going to have the same ratios, right? And we see that if we took BA, we know that's 29, and we put it over DE, we saw DE is 29 over 4. Then we see that that's just going to give us 1/4. Okay, and then if we took BC and we put it over EF, we see that BC is 21. We see that EF is 21 over 4. So once again, there we see we have 1/4. So understanding that those ratios between sides are going to be the same. All right, question 17. Which of the following is true about standard deviations of the two data sets in the above? So understanding standard deviation. There's not a ton of questions on standard deviation on the SAT, but it does show up. So it's important to know not the equation, but just how it works generally. Okay, we don't have to know the equation though. All right, so what am I looking for? Well, with a standard deviation question, I'm always looking for which one deviates the most from the mean. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is kind of find my average or my mean or my median. So in data set A, I see that my median's right around 62,000. Okay, I have my low minimum at about 25,000. I have my maximum about 126. My middle term is about 62,000. All right, well in data set B, I see my minimum's at 22,000, and I see my numbers are all very, very spread out. And I see my mean is at about 300,000. My maximum is about 600,000. Okay, I see we have a very, very large deviation from our mean in this data set B, okay, because our mean is at 300,000, but we're deviating by 300,000 pretty much both ways, whereas in data set A, we're only deviating by about 40,000, okay? So in each case, we saw that we had a lower minimum here, a greater maximum in data set B as well, right? And our mean is really just in between. So we have a very, very large deviation from the mean. If we were to plot this, right, if we have this here, right, this would look something like this. We'd go up, we'd hit our mean, and then here, let me rewrite this. I'm going to draw it as a scatter plot instead, right? So we have all of our points. We have our mean is here. This is going to be data set B, and then I'll make this one data set A. Okay, so this is our mean of 300,000. Okay, we see that we have points all the way over here, and we have points all the way over here. So this will be 600,000, and this one right here will be 20,000. Okay, so we have a large deviation from our mean, whereas if we were to plot A, we would have 62,000 just about, right? That's right here, that's our mean, and we have points that are very, very close to that, right? We have them at, right here we have 22,000, so very, very close, not much deviation, and then we'd also have a point just about right here of about 126,000. So we see that they're much, much closer to the mean than in data set B. So the standard deviation of data set B is going to be larger than the standard deviation of data set A. So 17 is going to be A. All right, question 18. We got velocity. That's a lot of words. Whenever there's a ton of words, sometimes I'll skip down, see if I can solve it without reading everything, because sometimes reading everything can take a long time. So what I'm going to look for in this case is going to be any equation that I have, and you can put this in your notes as well. If it's something that has tons and tons of words, you can try to pick out things if you're looking to save time, okay? And you can always come back and check your work later as well. If you're doing great on time, then I'd recommend reading the whole thing, but if you're short on time, you can kind of move quicker. So in this case, I see that V, my velocity, right, it says velocity V is going to equal 9.8 t, where t is in seconds. I see that this is there's a different linear relationship between time and velocity on Mars. Okay, then I see that I have a table. Now I'm asked my question. Okay, I always have to read my full question though. I can skip a little bit or skim, not skip, but I can skim around a little bit in my explanation, but I always want to read my full question. So if an object dropped toward the surface of Earth has a velocity of 58.8 meters per second after t seconds, what would the velocity of the same object drop toward the surface of Mars after t seconds, ignoring the effect of air resistance? All right, well, if I've got 58.8 as my meters per second on Earth, okay, so that's our velocity. We know that that's equal to 9.8 t. So I want to solve for t and then use t with my table here to solve for what that velocity is going to be on Mars. So I'm going to divide each side by 9.8, divide each side by 9.8, and I see that t is going to equal 6. Okay, because I plug that in my calculator, I see that t is equal to 6, or I can recognize it off the top of my head and see that t equals 6. Either way, we know t equals 6. Now we see 6 is right between this 14.8 and this 29.6. I also see that we're moving linearly up because we go up 4, right? We run 4, we rise 14.8. Once again, we run 4, rise by 14.8. Okay, so I'm just looking for what's between that 14.8 and that 29.6. So I got two options here. I can either find the average between them, right? So I could add them and then divide by 2, or I can find what or I could do this 14.8 divided by 4 and then multiplied by 6. So that's what I'll do just because I think it shows it a little bit better for you. So we have a 14.8 as our meters per second. We divide by our seconds, which is 4 right here. Okay, we're using these two terms. And that's going to give us our increase in velocity every second. Right, so that's our acceleration per second. So we got 14.8, we divide it by 4, and we get 3.7. So 3.7 t is what we're really looking at here. So how much seconds do we have? Well, in this case, we have 6, so we're going to multiply that 3.7 by 6 to get our answer. Right, we'll plug that into our calculator, and we see that our answer is 22.2. So our answer there is going to be B. All right, so as far as tips for that one, if there's really a ton of words and you're short on time, then here's what you're going to do. If you're short on time, there's a lot of words, you don't want to read it all, then what you want to do is you want to find equations, and you want to find what they're representing. So in this case, you saw I underlined velocity is v. T is seconds. V is 9.8, right? That tells me that my velocity is equal to 9.8 times however many seconds have passed. Okay. Another thing that I would underline there is that it's on Earth. Okay. Next thing I underlined was that there's a different relationship with velocity on Mars. Okay. Then I moved down in my table, read my question, and then solved. All right. So you can put anything along those lines in your notes. Now we got question 19. In the xy plane, the graph of line L has slope 3. Line K is parallel to line L and contains points 3 and 10. Which of the following is an equation of line K? All right, well, you see I already got it. So how did I get it that fast? Well, I'm going to show you. So one thing that I would recommend doing on the SAT math section is writing your equation as you read your problem. So you saw when I read I had a slope of 3, I immediately wrote y equals 3x. Okay, if I have a slope of 3, my equation is going to be y equals 3x. Okay, especially when it said line K is parallel to line L, then that tells me line K also has to have a slope of 3x. Next thing I read is that line K has points 3, 10. Okay, and then I saw that I was asked for the equation of line K. Well, I already had the slope of line K, but once I saw I had points 3, 10, what I did is I wanted to move back to 0, okay? Because all I had left to do was find the y-intercept because I already knew my slope. So I just wanted to work back to 0, okay? So if I was going to do a negative 3, so I was moving 3 to the left, right? So I have my graph here, I'm at 3 right here, we'll call it. I want to move 3 units to the left. If I want to do that, I need to multiply negative 3 by my slope. My slope was 3, I did negative 3 times 3. That gave me negative 9, so I did 10 minus 9 here, and I saw that at 0, I would have 0 and 1. So that would be my point there, which means my y-intercept had to be 1, so I knew my answer was D. Another thing, right, as soon as I saw my slope was 3x, I could go ahead and get rid of A and B because it said that it was parallel, all right? A and B, those A would have been the slope if it was perpendicular, okay, but it wasn't, it was parallel. So I could go ahead and get rid of A, I could get rid of B, I was between C and D, and then at that point I solved for my y-intercept, saw my answer had to be D. So getting rid of wrong answer choices as quickly as possible. And then the other big strategy thing is just as you read through a word problem like this, you want to write down your equation as you read it, because then you don't have to reread twice. So that's a big thing there. All right, question 20. A certain colony of bacteria began with one cell and the population doubled every 20 minutes. What was the population of the colony after 2 hours? All right, this is an exponential growth problem. Okay, so we know that we're beginning with one cell, so our initial value is 1, right? Our initial value is 1. We know that we are doubling every 20 minutes, okay, for 2 hours. Okay, so we're doubling, so we're multiplying by 2 raised to what power? Well, that's going to be the power of how often we are doubling. Okay, we know we're doubling every 20 minutes for 2 hours. Okay, we know that 2 hours is equal to 120 minutes. We divide that by that 20 minutes, and we see that we get 6. Okay, so we're going to double 6 times in total. Okay, we're doubling 6 times. All right, so we're doubling 6 times, which means we're going to have to raise this 2 to the 6th. Okay, this is our double, and this is us doing that 6 times. Okay, we plug that into our calculator. 2 to the 6th is 64. 64 times a 1 here gives us 64 as our answer D. All right, that's the fastest way to do it. One thing to note, if you couldn't figure out that this was going to be your equation, you could go through and double it, because this isn't that many times, it's only 6 times. So you could do that manually, but recognizing this equation is going to save you a lot of time, right? If you didn't have to do that, and you didn't have to double and count on your fingers and press times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 into your calculator 6 times, if you can just recognize that you're going to have that 2 raised to that 6th, that's going to save you some time. So that's just one thing that I would recommend noting in your notes, is that equation right there. So this 1 here was our initial value. This 2 was because we were doubling, and this 6 was because we were doubling 6 times total. All right, question 21. The circumference of Earth is estimated to be 40,030 kilometers at the equator. Which of the following best approximates the diameter in miles? All right, this is important here. One thing that I always want you to pay attention for on the SAT math section is when we're converting distances or converting lengths, units, widths, volume, anything like that. In this case, we're going from kilometers to miles. Okay, I want to pay attention to that. Other thing I want to always pay attention to is conversions between what measurements I'm doing. So here it was circumference, and here it is diameter. Okay, so I want to pay attention to that as well. I know my circumference is equal to my diameter times pi, so if I want to solve for my diameter, I got to divide by my circumference by pi. So circumference by pi is going to give me my diameter. All right, well, I know that pi is going to be roughly 3.14, so I'm going to have this 40,000 here, divide it by pi, put that in my calculator, right? 40,000 divided by pi, put it in my calculator. It's going to give me something around 13,000, I'd imagine. I know that that's not going to be my answer, though, because I have to convert to miles still. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and plug this in real quick. Like I said, that gave me just about 13,000. Right, in this case, notice how I'm not being super accurate. That's just because these things are all so far apart that I can tell I don't have to write down exact numbers. Okay, so like I said, it's going to be something around 13,000. Then at that point, I multiply by this 0.62 miles. Multiply by 0.62 miles. And I see that gives me just about 8,000 miles. So my answer there is going to be C. Okay, when answer choices are this far apart like this, don't feel like you have to write down this point, this 137, okay, because that's really not going to make enough of a difference to sway your answer choice any way or the other. Okay, so I didn't even use that in my calculator. I just used 0.62 because I saw that's all I needed to. Now, if these answer choices, A through D, were much, much closer to each other, then I would have put in 40,030, right, and I would have divided by pi using the pi symbol on my calculator, and then I wouldn't have put 1300. I would have put whatever it equaled exactly, and then I would have had to multiply by 0.62137. But in this case, answer choices were so far apart, I wanted to save time, and dealing with a little bit of a rough estimate was okay because of how far away these answer choices were, so I chose to save the time there. Okay, so that's one thing you can do on the SAT math section, but only if you're really, really comfortable with understanding how far apart answer choices are in units and things like that. So if you're already scoring really high, that can be one way to just save some time, but if you struggle with kind of telling how far apart things are like that, then you're going to want to use exact numbers. All right, 22. The budget for a school band was $8,000 in 2010. The budget decreased by 15% from 2010 to 2011, and then increased by 22% from 2011 to 2012. Which of the following expressions represents the budget in dollars for the school band in 2012? All right, well, that's going to be our $8,000 is our initial value. Then we lost 15% of that, so we had to multiply by 0.85 because that's what happens when we lose 15%. After that, we saw that we had to multiply by 1.22 because we increased our budget by 22%. All right, so our answer there is going to be whatever has 0.85 times 8,000 times 1.22. I see that that's answer choice B for 22. So 22, my answer there is going to be answer choice B. All right, so as far as big things for 22 to put in your notes, big thing that I'm looking at is pretty much what I'm looking at the end, right? So what I'm asked to answer with, which is the budget in 2012. So I always want to pay attention to that. Other big things, anytime we decrease by a certain percentage, we want to make sure that we're multiplying by something less than 1, right? So in this case, we take 1 minus our 15%, so 1.0 minus 0.15, and that gave us our 0.85 here. Next thing, if we're increasing by some percentages, then we're going to want to have a number above 1, right? So in this case, we increased by 22%, so that's going to be 1 plus 0.22, which gave us that 1.22. Okay, our initial value, we also have to make sure we have that, and that's $8,000. All right, so those are our big things there. So as far as things you can put in your notes, I pretty much called all of them out. So that's going to take us through the math section for today, and now we'll go ahead and switch over to the SAT writing section. All right, let's get started with today's SAT writing section. So I'll be taking you through two passages from the SAT writing section of the April 2018 released State of Maine SAT. So as I go through, I'll be giving you my tips, tricks, insights, and strategies for the SAT writing section. So I'll be going a bit slower than I would if I were actually taking it. So it'll be slower than the pace that you'll want to do when you're taking it. But that's really just so that I can show you what I look for and give you more of an in-depth view into how you can be efficient on the test, right? So really trying to teach you what I look for. So it's really more to teach right now than to work on pacing. We'll work on pacing later on in the 90 days, but for now we're really focusing more on accuracy and understanding why correct answers are correct and how to get rid of incorrect answers. All right, so let's start with our first passage. We have Benjamin Banneker, Marking Time. Benjamin Banneker gained local fame for making a working clock in 1753, a time when few people owned clocks, let alone understood their mechanics. Okay, how did I know that it had to be there? And keep in mind, it has to be this type of there. All right, well, first of all, the there that they have written down, so the no change option, that means they are, okay? In this case, we're looking for a possessive, okay? They are is not possessive, so I'm going to write right there, not possessive. All right, that's the wrong there. Okay, we need there, which is possessive, okay? Because it's their mechanics. They own these mechanics, all right? So who is there, right? How do I know it's there? How do I know it's plural? Okay, because there is plural. It's our plural possessive pronoun. It's is singular, okay? And then this is the wrong it's. This right here is it is. So I know that's incorrect as well. Okay, how do I know it's plural and not singular? All right, well, let alone understood their mechanics. What is there referring to? Okay, there here is referring to these clocks. Okay, a time when few people owned clocks, let alone understood their mechanics. Okay, the clock's mechanics. Okay, clocks is plural, so I need my plural possessive, which is there. All right, so my answer for 1 is going to be B. All right. A 22-year-old free black man living in Maryland, Banneker learned how to make the clock by examining the insides of a watch a merchant friend had lent him. His sharp skills in measuring the passage of time would eventually lead Banneker to the job of determining the official borders of the United States Capitol. Studious from an early age, Banneker completed his formal education only through algebra, at which point his father pulled him out of school to help on the family farm. A former teacher, however, encouraged Banneker to pursue his education independently and lent him the books to do so. Banneker also studied the night sky, charting how the migration of the stars relates to the passage of time. All right, why did I just say charting instead of he charted? Okay, how did I come up with that? Okay, and that is the correct answer. It's going to be C for number 2. So how did I get that right away? All right, well, here's why. All right, so immediately what I saw wrong. Okay, a lot of times it's about figuring out what's wrong with sections on the SAT writing section. Okay, if you can figure out what's wrong, you're going to be able to figure out what's right. Okay, because a lot of times if you know what's wrong, 3 of those answer choices will be wrong, and there'll only be one right answer choice, and that applies every single time. There's going to be 3 wrong answer choices, only 1 correct one. All right, so I have Banneker here. I have he here, all right? So I have Banneker also studied the night sky. That's an independent clause. Okay, if I was going to start with he charted how the migration of the stars relates to the passage of time, that's also an independent clause, okay? If I have 2 of those, I can't connect them with a comma or that's a comma splice, so I got rid of A right away. The next thing I saw was B, all right? If I start B with charting and I don't have he, then I don't have a subject, okay? So I can't do that either, okay? Because then I would have a dependent clause here and an independent clause here. Keep in mind, a dependent clause can't be a sentence on its own. Okay, so we can't have that be its own sentence. So B was going to be wrong no matter what. All right, D, comma, and he also charted once again. We have a subject here, we have a comma here, but we don't have a fanboy. Okay, remember the fanboys, they're for, and, nor, but, fanboys, or, yet, and so. Okay, we don't have any of those after that comma, so we can't connect 2 independent clauses like that. All right, so we can get rid of D as well. All right, so after taking so many practice tests, you really start to notice things and you're able to identify things really quickly. So in this case, as soon as I saw Banneker also studied the night sky, and then I saw a subject which had already been said, right? We already said Banneker. We don't want to say he again because that's repetitive and redundant. And then I saw a verb. I knew immediately I was going to have to take away the subject, change the verb ending to an ing, and then use this comma here, and I'd be good to go. Okay. So that's one thing to look for on the SAT writing section is anytime you say your subject, and then you have a really, really short independent clause, a comma, and then you say your subject again. First of all, you know it's going to be wrong because you didn't have a fanboy here. Okay, you didn't have a fanboy after your comma. The next thing, if you're repeating that subject, you don't want to do that because that's redundant. So you want to get rid of that. And then if you have a verb right after it, check which ending you need. In this case, it's charting, and then you should be good to go. Okay, but always make sure you're checking your work. Okay, and you can always check to make sure the other answer choices are wrong just by using grammar rules as well. All right, 3. Which choice effectively establishes the main topic of the paragraph? I'm not even going to read A through D yet. I want to find out what the main topic is first. That way I'm not wasting time. All right, when the wealthy Ellicott family built a flour mill not far from his farm, Banneker befriended George Ellicott. Okay, right here, anytime I see I have two names or two words that end a sentence and then start a sentence with that same thing, I'm going to want to combine them, okay? And that's what 4 says in its question, but I knew that already because that's just how the SAT writing section works, right? If you have something like this, you're looking to combine them, right? He befriended George Eliot. Okay, I want to get rid of this, or George Ellicott. I want to get rid of that, put a comma here, and I want to say whose knowledge. Okay, that's the other thing I want to look for. Whenever we have a situation like that, a lot of times I'm looking to use whose or who or when or sometimes how, not usually how though. Usually it's who, when, or whose, something like that. Because usually it's the name of someone or a subject. Here in this case it's George Ellicott, right? It's George Ellicott whose knowledge about science and astronomy impressed him, okay? It's his knowledge. So it's George Ellicott's knowledge, so we want to use whose here because that's possessive, right? It's his knowledge about science and astronomy, okay? So we want to use a comma and then whose. So our answer for 4 is going to be D. All right. We wouldn't say Ellicott of whom, okay, because this is not idiomatic. Idiomatic meaning what we would normally say, which I know that it's kind of frustrating when there's questions like that where you just kind of have to know what it is, but that's just what it is. So Ellicott from whom his, okay, from whom his, that's confusing. That's not idiomatic either. Ellicott, well, Ellicott's, no, once again, we see repeating Ellicott. We don't want to do that. We only want to say Ellicott once, okay, so we're going to say Ellicott, whose knowledge about science and astronomy impressed him. They met regularly at the flour mill in Banneker's home, where they met. Okay, met here, and I have met here. I don't want to say met twice, so I know A is going to be wrong, right? A, I have to make a change there. Okay, I don't want to say met twice, so I can get rid of that, and I can get rid of that. I know my answer choice has to be C for number 5. All right, so notice there how quickly I was able to get rid of B, D, and A, just because I knew I didn't want to repeat met twice or say met and then meeting, because that's redundant and repetitive, and I don't want to do that. So immediately I knew that was going to have to be C. So that's really just another thing. Okay, probably my number 1 tip on the SAT writing section is avoid repetition and redundancy. Okay, that's huge. If you can do those 2 things, avoiding repetition and redundancy, that's going to get you a lot of points. Okay, so that's really, really big. If you take nothing else from what I say, just take this, avoid repetition and redundancy. Okay, that's not going to be enough to give you a perfect score on the SAT writing section because you have to know grammar rules as well, but this is huge, okay? This is very, very prevalent and very, very widespread on the SAT writing section, is being able to avoid repetition and redundancy. All right, so that gave us 5. So now we have from Ellicott, Banneker borrowed books by authors such as James Ferguson, a leading astronomer of the time. All right, so now we got to go back and answer 3. So what most effectively set up the topic of that paragraph? Well, here we're really talking about a friendship, right? We're talking about a friendship from Banneker, okay? Banneker befriends someone in the 1770s, and it was a very good friendship for him. We're not saying that it filled him with social and political upheaval because it didn't. We're not saying that it was significantly influenced by several people because we're only talking about one, so several is the key wrong part there. Banneker continues his studies in math and science. We're really talking about his friendship at this point. Okay, does that friendship involve the study of math and science? Yes, it may, but we're really focused on the friendship, not math and science as much here. All right, now we've got our next one, K, right here. This is a big thing. You should put this in your notes if you don't have it yet. Anytime I see a 1, that means I'm going to find whatever sentence I'm being asked to place, and I'm going to read it first so I don't have to reread my whole paragraph. Especially imagine rereading this whole paragraph and trying to place a sentence after reading it already once. Having to read that twice would slow you down so much. Okay, so big thing here. I see I'm asked about sentence 3. I'm going to read sentence 3, come up with what I want to see before it and what should come after it. Okay, sometimes there won't be anything coming after it because sometimes it'll be at the end of a paragraph, but we definitely want to know what comes before it because something has to come before it. Okay, but we also want to pay attention to what could come after, because sometimes it could be first sentence, right, in which case what comes before it would be the previous paragraph. But either way, we want to come up with something before and something that could possibly be after. Okay, so a B and an A there. All right, so we have his cousin George likely recommended Banneker for the job. All right, that means I want to be talking about a job before it. Okay, so I'm going to write job. That should come before sentence 3. What should come after it? Well, his cousin George likely recommended Banneker for the job. Probably something about the job. Okay, so right here, this is going to be introducing the job. So I'll put introduce job. After it could be something explaining the job potentially. Okay, could be explaining the job. All right, so an introduction to what the job, how it came about, or something like that, some job opportunity, and then after that explaining possibly what the job is. So that's really what I'm looking for there. All right, so keep in mind that if I'm asked to place a sentence, I'm not going to read it as I read through, okay? Because I already read it once and I'm just looking to place it. So until I hear something about introducing a job, I'm not really going to read through. All right, so we have, in that same decade, the United States became a fledgling nation with no permanent capital. Federal legislators met in 8 different northern cities before they decided that as part of a broader compromise, a capital should be built farther south. His cousin George, or I don't need to read that, so I skip over that. In 1791, President Washington issued a directive. The capital would be situated on the Potomac River and encompass a 10-mile square that included the booming ports of Georgetown, then a part of Maryland and Alexandria and Virginia. Leading the team to determine the capital's boundaries was, okay, this has to be was, Major Andrew Elcott. Okay, how did I know it was? Well, this is a question about tense. Okay, we're working in the past tense. And since we're working in the past tense, my answer has to be was, because that's the only one that is in the past tense. Right? Additionally, were would be plural. Okay, so even though were is past tense, it's plural. Okay, and I need my singular because we're only talking about one man. Major, leading the team to determine the capital's boundaries was one man who was Major Andrew Ellicott. Okay, so we need that singular was, past tense singular, only one there is was. All right, so that's why 6 were is wrong. All right, a well-known land surveyor who needed a capable assistant. Okay, that's a big thing there. He needed a capable assistant. What's that talking about then? Capable assistant? Well, that sounds to me like that's a job opportunity, okay? So that right there is sentence 5. So I'm going to want to place that after sentence 5, okay? So that's my initial thought. I want to make sure that what comes after then, so this right here, this 6, it's talking about the job as a whole, or the skills needed for the job. So we have land surveying, the art. Okay, land surveying, so that's what he'll be doing. So we're explaining this job of this assistant. Okay, so I know I'm definitely going to be placing it after sentence 5 then. The art of measuring horizontal and vertical distances between objects demand a strong command of trigonometry and astronomy. All right, and this one's going to be particularly the ability to chart mathematically. So I'm going to get rid of 2, and I'm just going to have C particularly for 7. Okay, that one really is a question of being idiomatic. Okay, we're dealing with, we're really adding on something at the end here that isn't necessarily super important. Okay, and when we're doing that, this isn't even necessarily about importance. This is really just being idiomatic, okay? So we wouldn't say particularly to the ability. That's not idiomatic. We wouldn't say particular about the ability. Okay, that's also not idiomatic. So this is really just an idiom question. Okay, we would say particularly, all right? We wouldn't say in particularly either, just particularly. It's just an idiomatic question. So what would you normally say is really the big tip there. We would say particularly. Particularly the ability to chart mathematically. All right, and then we already placed sentence 3. It's going to come after sentence 5. All right, and then we go on. We talk about mathematically the course of celestial bodies in relation to the curvature of the rotating Earth, skills Banneker possessed, right? So those are skills he has, which is why he should get the job. Banneker and the rest of Major Ellicott's crew set up camp on Jones Point in early March 1791, a peninsula extending into the Potomac River. The point offered an expansive view of the territory. All right, here I see I have one word underlined beginning of a sentence with a comma after it. Anytime I see that I have one word underlined at the beginning of a sentence with a comma after it, immediately I'm thinking connecting my preceding sentence to my new sentence. Okay, immediately I'm thinking of making that transition. So what I do in that case, I just read my sentence before it, I skip over this, and I read what comes after, then I come up with my own answer as to what should connect them. Okay. All right, so what came before it? Well, we had discussion of a point, right, that offered a view of an expansive territory. We have a National Park Service plaque at Jones Point, commemorates the men's contributions in shaping the capital. Okay, I know commemorates is going to be the correct answer there, so I can get rid of B, C, and D. How do I know commemorates is going to be the correct answer? Because that plaque, right, it's serving as a memory of the men's contribution. Now, we would not say memorizes. Okay, memorizes would be if I was to memorize flashcards or something like that. It's commemorating it. Okay, commemorating it means to make it a memory, right? It makes it, it signifies the memory of what they did. Okay, memorizes would be if you were to memorize something and keep it in your memory, but commemorates is something where you're just putting something up that's in memory of something else, right? You're really doing that. You're not magnifying or fossilizing anything either. So 10 is going to be A. All right, so as far as commemorates the men's contribution in shaping the capital, all right, well, that's going to be in present day, right? We saw that we switched tense there, okay? We had offered, point offered an expansive view of the territory. That's past tense, so I'll put past, right? Now we're saying a National Park Service plaque at Jones Point commemorates. This is present, okay? That's a present tense verb. So present tense verb, which means I want to use something that's going to switch between my tenses since I just switched tenses. That's going to be today. Okay, we're switching from the past in 1791 to today. So now after some time, we want to be talking about today, present tense. Okay, not surprisingly and not additionally. Okay, so that's another thing as far as transitions. You want to not only transition between ideas, but transition between times. Okay, usually it's between ideas, but on rare occasion it'll be transitioning between time periods, and in that case you have to pay attention to that as well. So that's why I talked about in the first week when I was giving tips for the writing section, how it's different than reading for the reading section because we want to read for tenses of verbs and things like that. All right, so on a clear day looking north across the water, visitors can see the domed Capitol building rising towards the sky. At this point, the writer is considering adding the sentence. Visitors to Jones Point can also enjoy activities such as fishing and kayaking. Should we make this addition? No. Okay, why not? Because it's irrelevant here. All right, so that's going to be D, no, because it tacks on irrelevant information at the end of the passage. All right, so how did I get to D so quickly? Well, the only point in us talking about this National Park Service, right, was in discussion of this journey that was made with the Capitol and creating the border and everything that happened with Ellicott and all of them. Okay, we're not focused on what this park has to offer as far as activities. Okay, that's really unrelated and irrelevant. Okay, it's not relevant, and we don't go on to explain it either. Okay, so that's really not what we want to end with. Okay, because we want to end with something that talks about the main point of our passage or a main idea or a call for action, and we're not doing that with anything. We're not doing that with this if we were to add it on. Okay, so D is going to be no because it's irrelevant. All right, questions 12 to 22. We got energy storage under pressure, renewable energy sources. Okay, I see that I have one word underlined in the middle. So normally I'd be looking at something with tone, but in this case I see as I glance over that I'm going to have something with switching something. So we have the writers considering revising the underlined portion of the following. Renewable energy sources such as hydropower, wind power, and solar power pose a challenge for the businesses and utilities that use them. All right, so should we make this revision here? Yes. Why? Because it's offering examples that are clarifying a key term in the passage, right? I read up top in my title that we have energy storage under pressure, so I'm going to be talking about energy storage. Here we talk about renewable energy sources. Okay, some people might not know what those are, so we're going to want to clarify them, especially since it's going to be a key term in the passage, right? Now, if I read on and I find that it has nothing to do with the passage, then I would go back here and I would switch that, and B would not be my answer, okay? But in this case, I can kind of see that it's more than likely going to be talking about renewable energy sources since A, that's my topic sentence, B, it's in my title, so that gives me a good idea that that's going to be my answer there. So 12 is going to be answer choice B. As far as why not A, because it sets up how the information in the passage will be structured, we don't know the structure yet. Okay, the other thing too is this, in this case here, we're just providing examples. Okay, we're not using this as a thesis statement, so we can't say it's going to be how our passage is going to be structured. All right, so A, C, and D are going to be wrong. All right, the need to store surplus energy to use later during times of peak demand. Okay, that's correct. That's idiomatically correct. So we're going to have no change for 13. We wouldn't say during times for peak demand. We would say of peak demand. This is the wrong peak here. Okay, that's like if I was to peek in hide and seek. This right here is the correct peak, but we use for here, and we want to use of because that's what's idiomatic. Okay, because of is a preposition, which also indicates to us that that's going to be a question on idioms. Right, same thing with for. If you were to see for there, you'd also know that it's likely a question on idioms. All right, so for example, wind fluctuates and generally produces more energy during the night when demand is lower. Conversely, solar power generates most of its electricity during the day and provides little power at night. A method of storage called compressed air energy storage, or CAES, is one method. Okay, I already know that this is going to be wrong. How do I know? Because I saw method twice. I don't want to say method twice. I can't remove it from right here, so I have to remove it from this here. All right, so CAES, looks like I'm just going to remove it, to be honest with you. And that is going to be what I'm going to do. I'm going to remove it. Okay, so how did I know I was going to remove it? Well, because it's unnecessary, right? We already said a method of storage called compressed air energy storage, or CAES. Okay, this is my subject. It may be one of the best solutions to this problem. Okay, I don't need to say is because I say maybe, right? That would be repeating two things that mean very, very similar things, which would mean I'd be being redundant and repetitive. I don't want to do that. Like I said, I want to get rid of one method because I already said method. And right here, I don't need that either. Okay, so all of those are removable. And if something is removable without changing the meaning of a sentence, I want to remove it because then it's just unnecessary and it's not concise, right? When I talked in the first week about tips, I talked about being concise, right? We want to be very efficient in our word choice, and removing that is how we're going to be the most efficient there, right? Saying is a particularly means of storage. We already talked about it being storage, so we can get rid of that. I already talked about why A is wrong. Constituting a form of storage, once again, we already talked about storage. So 14 is going to be D. All right, now we've got a number here, which means I'm going to go find what sentence needs to be placed. I see it's sentence 2, so I want to come up with what comes before the sentence and what comes after. The expanding air drives a turbine, generating electricity. So I need something about expanding air coming before it, because I say the expanding air drives a turbine. So I want something that talks about expanding air before it. And then this might come at the end, I don't know yet, but if there's something that comes after, I'd want to be talking about electricity, because that's what was just made. Electricity. All right. Power plants with gas systems use surplus energy produced during off-peak hours to pump into large underground cavities such as naturally occurring air or human-made salt or rock caverns. The walls of these spaces have been specially fortified to handle the high pressure and density of pressurized air. As air is pumped into the inflexible cabin, the pressure increases up to 1,100 pounds per square inch. When energy is needed later, the power plant releases pressurized air from the cavity, causing the air to expand. Right? What did I say had to become before it? Expanding air. Right here I have causing the air to expand. So I'm going to want to place my sentence after sentence 5. So my answer for 15 then will be D. So I hope that you're getting a good idea of how important it is to go through, find your sentence first, read it, come up with what should come before, what should come after as your own answer choice. Then read through your paragraph, because then you don't have to read through twice, right? If you have to read through twice, you're going to waste time. This way you only got to read through once, and it's really, really easy to find where it goes, right? And another thing you should notice is that anytime it's asking you to place a sentence, there's always context clues as to what should come before and after the sentence, always, right? So that also makes it very, very easy to use that strategy. So highly, highly recommend that strategy. I would definitely recommend putting that in your notes. All right, question 16. Currently, only 2 power plants use CAS, one in McIntosh, Alabama, and another in Huntorf, Germany. So what's wrong with this right off the bat? Well, right off the bat, as I read this, I saw I have a semicolon here, and I have a non-independent clause after it, so I know that A is going to be wrong. But what I did see right away is I saw that I was illustrating, right? I was illustrating, and I'm totally misspelled that, so I'm going to rewrite that. Right? I saw that I was illustrating my idea that was in my first independent clause with what came after this punctuation here. So I had an independent clause here. Currently, only 2 power plants use CAS. Then I went on to illustrate those two power plants. So I'm illustrating that idea that came in my first independent clause. When I illustrate an idea that came in my first independent clause, I want to use a colon. So right away, I'm looking at C as my correct answer. Okay, B is going to be wrong because saying one in McIntosh and another in Huntorf, Germany, that's not a good sentence. I don't believe that it's a full sentence either, so I can get rid of that. And then right here, I wouldn't use a comma and then do one, because then I'm splitting up one in McIntosh, and I don't want to do that. Okay, I want to use that colon right after CAS, and then get into what illustrates my first independent clause. So that's going to be answer choice C for 16. The McIntosh power plant can produce up to 110 megawatts of electrical power. I have a comma here, so right here I'm probably looking at dealing with independent clauses and things like that. All right, so I have the McIntosh power plant can produce up to 110 megawatts of electrical power. That's an independent clause. Then I have the German plant can produce 321 megawatts. It's also an independent clause, which means if I'm going to use a comma here, I have to use a fanboy, which I see I do in C. I have a comma and is one of my fanboys, so that can be used to connect my independent clause. The other thing that I want to look for then is if and properly connects them. Okay, so does it work? Well, I'm giving one example of producing power from a power plant, and then I'm also giving another. So and is a great option there, and it is our best option, and it's our only option because all the other options are wrong. So 17, our answer there is going to be C. Right, we wouldn't say power and then say as well as, because then we don't have a semicolon or a comma and a fanboy connecting 2 independent clauses. Okay, so A is comma splice, B doesn't connect 2 independent clauses. We would have comma splice there as well. And then D, we use a semicolon, but then we say well. Well is a subordinating conjunction. Okay, subordinating conjunction, which means that it's going to start a dependent clause. So if we were to put well there, we'd be making that second part, instead of an independent clause, we'd be making it a dependent clause, which would be incorrect then, okay, because we can't use a semicolon to connect an independent clause to a dependent clause, so D would be wrong. So that's why D would be wrong. All right, combined, that's enough energy to service approximately 431,000 homes. All right, I see I have a full sentence underlined, so I'm probably asked to keep it or delete it, and I am asked to keep it or delete it. All right, so why would I keep it? Well, I already know I'm going to keep it. How do I know that? Well, I know I have to keep it because I'm talking about two power plants up here, and I'm talking about the amount of power they produce, but I want to know why that power is significant. Well, it's significant because it can power 431,000 homes. So that's giving me an answer to my why and explaining why this evidence matters. Okay, so I want to keep that because it's explaining why my evidence matters. All right, so what is it doing? It's not transitioning to another point about how to provide electricity to homes. Okay, it's not transitioning. I get rid of B. I want to keep it because it shows the impact of the two CAS points that are currently in use. So 18 there is going to be A, right? It's showing that impact that it can power 431,000 homes, right? We don't want to delete it because it's showing that impact. So we can get rid of C, get rid of D. All right, so we've got, that takes us through there. There are a few other CAS projects in progress across the United States, including pilot projects in Ohio, California, and New Jersey. There are a number of reasons that so few CAS units have been built, despite the fact that CAS is one of the few reliable ways to store energy from renewable energy sources. First, huge underground cavities are possible only in certain types of land. Second, where these formations exist, reinforcing them and building infrastructure for CAS can cost, I don't want any punctuation in there at all. I want to just say building the infrastructure for CAS can cost upwards of 100 million. Okay, anything that I put in between there is going to be wrong because I'm just splitting up a subject CAS from its adverb can, or its verb, adverb, verb. Either way, I'm splitting up something that shouldn't be split up. So I don't want to do that, so I'm not going to want any punctuation between those two, right? If I was to say I can run, I don't want something between, right, this adverb can before my verb run. I don't want anything splitting that up, okay? That's all should be one thing that goes together. I don't want to use a comma, semicolon, or anything like that to split that up, right? So sometimes using an overly simplified example can be helpful, not always, but sometimes. In this case, I'm using it to illustrate to you how we don't want to split up something like a subject and then can cost, right? Cost being our verb, right? Can being our adverb, right? We don't want to split anything up there, okay? CAS being our subject. We don't want to split that up. We want to keep it together. So no punctuation between those. 19 will be C. All right, now we've got question 20. Finally, traditional methods of CAS require. How did I know it was require? I had to get rid of CAS. Okay, of CAS is a prepositional phrase. I don't consider that when matching subject and verb. Okay, I have to match my subject and verb in number. My subject here is methods. Methods is plural. Okay, I put that S for subject, but it's plural. Okay, so that's P is for plural. Methods is plural, so I need my plural verb, which is going to be require. Okay, require. I would not say does require. Right, I wouldn't say does require because that does is unnecessary. I don't want to use it. Okay, that would be unnecessary, redundant, don't want to use it. All right, so we would say finally traditional methods require. Okay, it's plural. Another way that you can check this is just think they, right? If we're going to say they, would we say they require or they requires? We would say they require. So we know require is going to be plural. If we're going to say he requires, you heard me say it, we would say he requires. So we know requires would be singular. In this case, we need plural, so we're going to be using D. All right, though the system is initially expensive and involves an expenditure of energy, CAS has been proven to be reliable and economically viable in the long term. Furthermore, researchers have developed methods of CAS that reach much better efficiency levels by apprehending the heat. No, we can't apprehend heat. All right, apprehending would be like if you were to capture someone, like the police would apprehend a suspect. Okay, like I said, we don't want to use capturing either. Okay, or I'm sorry, yes, we do want to use capturing. What am I saying here? Yes, capturing is a great word there. Capturing is our answer. I'm sorry, I got too caught up in my police apprehending suspect analogy. Capturing is correct. I totally blanked there. Okay, we wouldn't say that they're arresting it. Okay, we can go back to the police analogy. Again, we're not arresting the heat. Okay, because we aren't the police. We're not seizing the heat once again because we're not the police. We are capturing the heat using CAS, right? These methods of CAS reach better efficiency levels by capturing the heat. They're not apprehending the heat. They're not arresting the heat, and they're not seizing the heat. They are capturing it. All right, after that, absolutely. I can't believe I messed that up. That's okay though. I caught it very, very quickly. So, all right, these methods can be used in CAS units built in the future. Given the growing shift to renewable energy, the only stumbling blocks. All right, so I hear anytime I have my last part of a passage underlined, I know I'm pretty much asked what should conclude. So sometimes they'll give me directions for how it wants me to conclude. In this case, it says it wants me to conclude with a restatement of the main idea of the passage. So which choice is going to restate the main idea of the passage? Well, what is the main idea of the passage? Well, the main idea of the passage here is that CAS is a promising solution to one of alternative energy's biggest challenges. All right, alternative energy's biggest challenge is that it can't store energy when it's not in use, for example, during nighttime, right? And this is talking about how CAS is a promising solution to that. So that's the main idea here. We want to close with our main idea is what we said up here, right? Restating that main idea of the passage. So our answer there is going to be B. We wouldn't say the only stumbling blocks to additional innovations because we're not focusing our main idea on stumbling blocks, and we're not dismaying CAS technology because it's not as efficient as it could be, right? We're actually arguing for it. Next, we have D, residential applications of CAS technology in addition to large operations are likely to be feasible soon. We're not talking about a timetable for when it'll be feasible or not feasible. We're just talking about it as a promising solution. All right, so that takes us to the writing section for today. If today was helpful to you, there'll be a donation link in the description if you'd like to donate. When it's up and running, it'll be linked in the description. Any private SAT tutoring I'm doing will be linked in the description. Any private college admissions consulting I'm doing will be linked in the description. So that'd be college essay help and things like that. As always, make sure to subscribe, like, and share, and make sure you have a good day.